Let's get virtual. That's right, the NFL draft this year through Zoom, just like every single piece of education right now. We're talking NFL draft today exclusively, nothing else. We'll be talking about the Jordan documentary next episode, so if you came for that, you'll have to wait till Thursday. And then, before this show starts, don't forget to follow me on Twitter at ChrisRennieCFB. Check out my other show, Buck Off, anywhere you listen to podcasts besides Apple Podcasts for the time being. But if you listen to the show a little later and want to listen to that one, it might be up on Apple soon. Buck Off with Christopher Rennie. Subscribe to this show and rate it anywhere you listen to podcasts. That is the most helpful thing for a podcaster is to get ratings. So please do that. And last but not least, before the show starts, enjoy your time with me. Enjoy the show. This is the Chris Rennie Show, episode 18. Let's get drafted. I can't do this anymore. What's this guy saying? Who gave these national radio hosts these jobs? Jeez. Can't even understand that guy. What's he even talking about? I can't take it anymore. Those national media personalities making you feel like that. Make a change. Listen to this idiot about the sports that matter from the opinion that matters. Haha, you said it, not me. Now for today's takes from the most opinionated host in sports talk. So, the NFL drafts tonight. This is your host, Christopher Rennie, and no, I did not get drafted last year when I declared for it. Came up a little short. I talked to a few teams. They said, "Who are you, bro?" And they ended up not drafting me. Surprise, surprise. All right, well, the draft to me is one of the best sporting events in the world, but it's been hard to stay interested in it this year with all this coronavirus stuff. So I'm going to do my best on this show to just talk about a few storylines and topics that are coming around. I'm going to give my favorite draft story of all time and my least favorite draft ever. All right. So let's get into it. The draft to me is one of the best sporting events in the world, as I said to start the show. There is not even a sporting event in the world like it. The MLB draft, The NBA draft, the little lottery part where the balls drop is way better than the actual draft itself. And every other professional sports team in the sports league in the world does not draft players, they sign players. So it's weird, in the United States, the draft system has worked. It's been great. Teams have built championships through the draft, which is the whole goal, which is why the worst team gets the first pick, so they can get the best player, and then in turn create a good winning franchise. Well, throughout the rest of the world, the best teams buy the best players, and that's how it works. But in the NFL and in American sports, the downtrodden franchises receive the best option in the draft. You don't get rewarded for being good in American professional sports. In the National Football League, you win the Super Bowl, you get the last pick in the draft because they say, well, you're already good enough. You don't need the next best player, Is it fair? Is it rewarding? No, it's not. But that's not supposed to be the point. It's supposed to help the worst become better. And that, to me, is why the draft is so fun. It gives you hope. It provides you with that little bit of just brightness in your future. And as a Browns fan for years, it was the only solace you found in the sport. You knew the next year you're probably going to go 6-10, and then we went on the worst run in NFL history. 0-16 and 1-15. The mix of those two seasons combined was just horrendous. But now the Browns are good. And I'm not going to say that's why I'm interested less in the NFL draft. I love the NFL draft. It's just to me this year, like, you don't have those all-timer great quarterbacks. You know, Joe Burrow is going to be a solid pro, I believe. Tua Tagovailoa, if he stays healthy, is going to be a solid pro. But, you know, you think back, I think maybe part of it's the Browns don't need a quarterback, but it just seems like this draft, there's going to be a lot of reaching when it comes to that position. And then, you know, this is a loaded receiver draft. I love receivers. Everyone who listens to this show knows it's a position I played. It's a position I love. It's a position I find so much joy in watching. You know, that and defensive backs are the positions I understand the most, and I just enjoy watching the most. It's common sense when you listen to me talk. I like the passing game, you know. I don't talk about running backs all that much, but, you know, you look at what the draft is, and this year it just doesn't feel like you have those stars you were getting, you know. I really enjoy this draft. I think there's going to be a lot of players I enjoyed watching in college in this draft. But it's just this weird feeling I get. You know, I think with this whole coronavirus, I have lost a little interest. And now I'm going to watch so much of the NFL draft. There is no questions about it. And I'm going to tweet about the NFL draft. And, you know, the good thing about when I talk about the NFL draft is I watch so much college football that I know most of these players anyways when I'm looking at big boards. But there's always going to be those dark horse picks that I just haven't watched because they play in the Appalachian Mountains or they play on some Division II school and no one really has seen them watch besides NFL scouts. And that's where this draft is interesting. The other aspect of this draft this year that's interesting is it's virtual, 100%, completely virtual. The best part was Pat McAfee tweeted today. He tweeted, "Which quarantine draft style are you?" John Lynch had like 3 plasma screen TVs, 3 desktop monitors. It was awesome. It was super classy, super futuristic looking. Then you sort of had the nice middle ground. I can't remember his name, but it was just a nice 2 laptops. You know, he had his big screen, his desk monitor. It was cool. Then he had his TV, obviously, to follow the draft live. Then he had Dave Gettleman, the boomer, New York Giants. His setup, it was his laptop on a stack of papers with a notebook next to him. 1 laptop. Dave Gettleman, you make enough to have at least 2 laptops. And if that laptop dies or goes out during the draft, it is going to be one of the most hysterical draft moves in the history of the NFL draft. And I really do think David Gettleman is capable of forgetting to charge his laptop and then miss a draft pick. This might happen. You know, we're going to find out which GMs have the best internet. We're going to find out who uses Spectrum and who uses anything else. We're going to figure out who has the good broadband, who has the good bandwidth. And that's going to say a lot about where your franchise is going. You know, whichever GM has the best internet understands the importance of technology and analytics. And that's why I have this really big feeling that John Lynch is going to have a really good draft this year. Is it a reach to believe that just because you have better technologies in your own home that you're going to have a better draft? No, it's not a reach. It absolutely is not a reach. I know for a fact that Dave Gettleman with his stack of papers is not going to be able to cipher through the information he's looking at as fast as John Lynch with 3 monitors. And everyone's going to be like, oh, what do you need 3 monitors for? 3 different scouting profiles, same time. What do you need 3 monitors for? Dave Gettleman's going to be ciphering through his papers. That's wasting time, everybody. That is wasting time. What are we going to do wasting time? You know, I get it. You want to keep it simple. But, you know, sometimes more technology is simpler. As long as you know how to use it. People are going to be like, well, what if John Lynch's power goes out? Well, you got bigger problems. You wouldn't be able to call into the draft anyways. If someone's internet goes out, well, we're in trouble. Period. Anyone's in trouble. Dave Gettleman's going to use his papers. All right, that's cool. That's interesting. But really do believe this virtual draft can get interesting in ways that doing it in person could never, ever be. Technically, in a lot of places, the draft is remote. You work from your headquarters, so the Browns would be in Brea, Ohio. The Jets would be in New Jersey. And, whatever team is where they're going to be. The Patriots and Foxborough, respectively, the places they are based. But what is different is not everyone's going to be in the same room. This might actually be helpful with decision making. It's going to be clearer. You're not going to be able to hear as many voices when you're making the pick. That person who throws in that last minute of doubt on a scout because they get a little nervous about making the pick. They're like, this guy had that question mark. Are we sure about it? They pull the trigger on someone else because they're unsure. That might not happen as much. So there might be clearer thinking. But then again, if there's a group chat like on Zoom, everyone's going to be like typing and being like, do, get this pick in. Then it's going to blow up the internet. All right. The other aspect is Roger Goodell's not going to be able to get booed. It's going to be the first time ever. I'm excited. It's going to be good for his self-esteem. He needs it. That $45 million he gets every year to be a very subpar commissioner, he needs it. It's a tough job. We all know it's a tough job. He could do it better, though. But the root of what the NFL draft is still going to be there. And that is what's important. Kids are going to get to live out their dreams. We're going to get to see the Chase Youngs, the Joe Burrows, in the comfort of their own home, not sweating in suits. I always liked it when prospects were at home and got drafted. You got to see the celebration with everybody. It's cool walking up on stage, shaking hands with the commissioner, but it's just cool watching prospects celebrate with their family, their close friends, and then you get moments like when you get to see Brady Quinn. You're not going to get those moments where you're going to see Brady Quinn sweating and falling to pick 22. You're not going to see Aaron Rodgers' face go from, yeah, here it goes, to I'm going to murder every single person in this building because I haven't gotten picked yet. You don't see that. You don't. And that's what it's all about. Drafting. My fantasy draft did not go well last year. It'd be like if Roger Goodell had to run the entire draft and then pick players at the same time for his team every so often. Dalvin Cook was my big steal. We'll see if any of these teams get a nice steal in this draft. I've got some beliefs. I've got really set in stone beliefs about the NFL draft. Who's my favorite player? You're going to find out. Who do I think is going to be a hit? Who's going to be a miss? You're going to find out. But the most interesting thing isn't going to be who's drafted where. It's going to be how this virtual draft actually plays out. All right, before I get into the business discussion of this show, I just want to give my two favorite draft stories ever. My favorite draft story of all time. And this is just a funny story. Okay, so we're going to have to take us into a time machine. You guys remember the quarterback Brady Quinn, right? Well, he was one of my favorite college quarterbacks. He played at Notre Dame, super handsome guy, went to Dublin Kaufman High School, Columbus, Ohio, Notre Dame. The big-time school. Everyone knows Notre Dame. Well, he got drafted in the first round, all right? And when you look at the 2007 NFL draft, there was a certain player drafted in this draft that ended up going on to be a Hall of Famer at his position and was one of the greatest of all time, all right? So now you look at the number one pick in the draft, Jamarcus Russell. All right. We all know how that panned out. Number 2, Calvin Johnson. Probably shouldn't take a receiver number 2. But, he went on to have an all-pro Hall of Fame career. And then me at 3, as a Browns fan, as a kid. All right. Who do I want? I want Brady Quinn, my favorite college quarterback at the time. He's just one of these great football players. He's cool, he's tall, he plays quarterback, he runs a little bit. He literally looked like a quarterback out of a movie. Went to Notre Dame, can't miss him. And then, at 3, there's all this talk that Joe Thomas is going to get taken with the 3rd pick by the Browns. And now, don't get me wrong, Joe Thomas went on to be a Great pro. Hall of Famer, the best tackle in the league during his time. Unfortunately, his career was ravaged by the lack of success of the Cleveland Browns. But Joe Thomas gave everything he had to the franchise, and you could claim he truly is the heart and soul of Cleveland and the Browns when it came to football for that whole decade and a half he was in the league. You know, what this 2007 draft is famous for, it was just filled with talented players. You know, you look at this first round, Adrian Peterson, Marshawn Lynch, Darrelle Revis, Eric Weddle, Ryan Khalil, Marshall Yonda, really great player. You know, there's just some very notable names. You had Megatron, Ted Ginn Jr., one of my favorite, Patrick Willis, Lawrence Timmons. These names are huge. This is one of the better drafts, you know. And, you know, being older, more mature, I understand what went into this. I understand this now. I understand better that Brady Quinn, the more I look at some of these players, you know, I'm not surprised he fell to 22, you know? And that, to me, says a lot about how much I've grown as a follower of the sport of football. You know, and the Browns had a similar situation a few years later. They got Justin Gilbert at like 8. They traded down, got Justin Gilbert at 8, picked up the 22nd pick. Everyone's like, man, this was a great draft. We got Johnny Football, a good corner. Both of them ended up being terrible. All right, so at least the Browns got a Hall of Famer in Joe Thomas. We needed that. But, you know, I was so upset. And that's why it's one of my favorite draft stories. And the part that makes it my favorite is the Browns still ended up getting him at 22. And that is what makes this one of my favorite draft stories. And the fact that there are so many good, talented players in the NFL that were drafted during this time, and some of them are still there. Then you just look at some of these quarterbacks that were taken after Brady Quinn. It wasn't that great of a quarterback draft. You know, it didn't pan out the way people thought. That was okay. But my least favorite draft story, I sort of mentioned it a little. It was that draft with Johnny Manziel. But it's tied for first. So I mentioned the Johnny Manziel one, and I got to be honest, I was really excited for that one. But the other one, the real least favorite here, all right, and everyone's got their least favorite draft their team has ever had. This was my least favorite. It's not even close. You know, the thing is, when you draft a player into the league and he's already old, it's probably not a good draft pick, okay? So in 2012, the Cleveland Browns, once again, had a few first-round picks. And they blew this one. They blew this one harder than they blew the other draft. All right, now this was not, you know, Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin, they were going 1 and 2. Everyone knew that. It was the way it was going to be. All right, that was going to be that way. All right. But there was a lot of great players in this draft, all right? Look at this. You had Luke Kuechly, Stephon Gilmore, Fletcher Cox, really good players that were after this, all right? The Browns drafted Trent Richardson at number 3. He never panned out. That's unfortunate. We all know it was not cool. You know, Robert Griffin III, that was fun. Andrew Luck was one of the best quarterbacks in the league the minute he got drafted. You know, you keep looking at this list, and then what does the Browns do? They trade up to Atlanta. Oh, they got a pick from Atlanta, all right? And they traded into the spot at 22. And they drafted Brandon Weeden from Oklahoma State. Yeah, so I was very upset that they took Brandon Weeden. I was more upset than that because at least when you look and compare it to Johnny Manziel, odds are Johnny Manziel partied. You're not going to make it in the league doing what Johnny Manziel did. I think deep down, I knew that. He flipped a guy off. But Brandon Weeden, how often does a 29-year-old quarterback get drafted, and succeed in the league. Let's type in QB and Control F, all right? So you had Andrew Luck, Robert Griffin III, Ryan Tannehill, solid pro, wasn't going to make it down to 22 though. All right, that's fine. He's definitely not worth the 3 pick, even though we took Trent Richardson. So anything would have been better. All right, so Brandon Weeden. Let's see who got taken after Brandon Weeden here. Brock Osweiler. All right, pretty similar to Brandon Weeden career-wise. Oh, 3rd round, 75th pick, Russell Wilson. 88th pick, Nick Foles. 102nd pick, Kirk Cousins, my favorite NFL quarterback. Then you had Ryan Lindley, all right, that's fine. BJ Coleman, all right, doesn't matter. Chandler Harnish, fine. NIU, Chandler Harnish was lit, though, at NIU. But you get what I'm saying. There were 3 good quarterbacks after Brandon Weeden, all way younger than 29 years old. I mean, Kirk Cousins and Russell Wilson were older for draft prospects, and, that is really heartbreaking to me that the Browns could have had Kirk Cousins. Could have had Kirk Cousins multiple times. He's elite, and goddamn, that's tough. All right, let's get into some of the top storylines going into this draft, all right? The first storyline to me, and this isn't going to be like individual player storylines, this is going to be overarching themes in relation to the NFL draft. All right, so this draft is loaded with wide receivers. When you want to talk about the best position in the draft, it is no doubt to me this draft is a wide receiver draft and an offensive tackles draft. All right, so when you really take a deep dive into this class at wide receiver, there is not really a bad draft prospect. It is loaded from top to bottom. 2020 NFL draft prospects. You got CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, keep it rolling, Henry Ruggs III, T. Higgins, Justin Jefferson, Chase Claypool from Notre Dame, Jalen Reagor from TCU, who might be the most athletic person in the draft, Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State, very underrated, a little bit smaller, but very, very bursty route runner. Denzel Mims, very solid wide receiver. Gabriel Davis, Central Florida. KJ Hamler, Penn State, one of the best football players I've watched. Laviska Shenault, I think he'll be the steal of the draft. I think his production was hurt due to the quarterback play at UC Boulder. Lynn Bowden is going to be one of the most versatile draft prospects in the draft. Tyler Johnson, good player. Colin Johnson's a good player. Michael Pittman Jr. This guy won the Biletnikoff. So, the 16th best receiver prospect in the draft, according to Walter Football, is a Biletnikoff. And I just pulled them up because they're the first one to pop up in Google. It was more about the names. But when you hear Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs III, Denzel Mims, all these top-tier receivers, and that's even before I get to my guys at Ohio State with KJ Hill, Austin Mack, Benjamin Victor, all going to be solid football players in the pros. There is a solid amount. Donovan Peoples-Jones from Michigan is a great receiver. Quintez Cephas, Jeffrey Okudah called him his hardest guard in college. If you don't draft a wide receiver in this draft, you're missing out. Every single one of these receivers, I think, can pan out to be a solid pro wide receiver. That's absurd. Obviously, in the college football game, receivers are just getting better, and once you take that leap to the NFL, you never know how it's going to work out. But the fact that, according to Walter Football, Isaiah Hodgins from Oregon State, one of the most talented receivers in the Pac-12, is 33rd on this list, says a lot. So that's a huge storyline to watch. And if you're a receiver-needy team like the Cowboys or the Vikings now, or one of those teams, the Patriots need weapons, this is a draft where you're going to find weapons, absolutely. And I think realistically, there's going to be a lot of teams who add long-term receiver prospects to their core. And that's going to be important moving forward. All right, so the next one to me that we're going to talk about, the next biggest theme in this draft is there's no real definitive number one quarterback prospect to me. I know Joe Burrow is great. He's a great quarterback prospect in this draft. He's number one. But is he the best thing the NFL is going to get? No. I think he's good. He's an upper-level starter. I think he's a little bit better than Andy Dalton ceiling-wise. His accuracy in college was unreal. I think the combination of his offensive coordinators and passing game coordinator and Joe Brady really helped him take that extra leap development-wise. But Joe Burrow, to me, is an Andrew Luck. He's not some of these other top-tier quarterbacks we've seen in recent memory. And if Tua Tagovailoa didn't get hurt and injure his hip, he probably would be the number one draft prospect to me. So those two have separated themselves for sure, hip injury and all. And then you have all this talk surrounding guys like Justin Herbert, who I just don't see as being a great pro. He's 6'6", 236, a phenomenal athlete. Got better his sophomore year, but definitely plateaued development-wise. And I'm not talking, like, yes, he looked great. He threw some unbelievable rockets downfield. But the fact that the differentiation in his stats from his sophomore to his senior year per game were not significantly better, is kind of alarming to me. He threw for 1,900 yards at 9.6 yards per attempt as a sophomore in 8 games. Had 167.5 passer rating, and then degressed a little bit. 59% completion percentage, 7.8 yards an attempt, 29 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. And then in 2019, 32 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. His touchdown to interception ratio is pretty solid. You look at 2019 Oregon, it was a team that was pretty talented. I think really 12-2 in the Pac-12, solid. They came up short against some of their best competition, and that is where I sort of see the issue with Justin Herbert. When he was challenged, he was not a great quarterback, and that's the NFL. You were challenged, and to me, Justin Herbert doesn't have great anticipation, so he's a reach. He's an absolute reach. Jordan Love, people are talking about anywhere from like 8 in the draft to, I don't even know. People have talked about him going to the Chargers, to Jacksonville, to the Raiders. There's been so many talks about him being an upper echelon first-round pick. Then there's also talks that he might not even go in the first round, and that is very inconsistent. And this draft by CBS Sports has Jordan Love as the number 23rd pick to the New England Patriots, and I'm going to tell you why that's incorrect. That is not the player Bill Belichick coaches, period. Bill Belichick likes accurate, in the system, will not make mistakes, he doesn't need Patrick Mahomes to win Super Bowls. His defense is going to take care of most of it. He needs the quarterback to be able to go out and score 30 points, not turn the ball over, and run the offense. Jordan Love, to me, isn't that guy. All right? Then you have a guy like Jacob Eason, and there is conversation that people are willing to take Jacob Eason in the first round. Okay, that is obnoxious to me. That idea that he can possibly move up into the first round is absurd. You look at his career stats, at Georgia, his freshman year, 2,400 yards, 16 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. His 2019 season, after sitting out a year transferring, 3,100 yards, 23 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. He was a solid, above-average NFL quarterback, but, man, was it special? Absolutely not. I just don't see these guys panning out, and there's going to be reaches. Jake Fromm, don't see him panning out. Jalen Hurts, I don't see him panning out. James Morgan, Florida International, don't really see him panning out. Steven Montez, not a very good quarterback. Don't know why he's on this list. Nate Stanley, Khalil Tate, never really showed anything great throwing the football. Cole McDonald, some guy compared his game to being on heroin. I don't know who wrote that. I don't think that is appropriate. And it doesn't really make sense. He was a solid football player. Mason Fine's very underrated. If he wasn't 5'9", he'd be one of the best quarterbacks in all of college Anthony Gordon, another Mike Leach disciple. There's just not a very deep quarterback draft this year. So looking at it, I just don't see it working out for many of these guys besides the top two. And even them, their ceilings just aren't high. Tua doesn't have that game-breaking ability outside the pocket. And Joe Burrow doesn't have that ability to drive the football like you need to all the time in the NFL, but that doesn't mean he can't be super successful. It's just they're going to have to work with him and find ways to win. And another aspect to Joe Burrow's future success is he's getting drafted to Cincinnati. They have shown no ability to build a Super Bowl contender, and that is more alarming to me about Joe Burrow's future than anything else. Moving forward, in this draft, there is a ton of offensive tackle talent. That is a very big plus in this draft. In the first round, when you look at this, you've got, let me look at the list. Tristan Wirfs, you've got him, Jedrick Wills, Mekhi Becton, Andrew Thomas from Georgia. Keep it moving. Ezra Cleveland, Josh Jones, Cesar Ruiz, all guys. Cesar Ruiz is an interior lineman. But there's a lot of opportunity for really, really good pass protection and really good offensive linemen in this draft. I really hope Tristan Wirfs falls to the Browns. I think he's the best tackle in the draft. I think his athleticism is exactly what you want in an NFL tackle. And, I like Mekhi Becton, but he's big. He's really large. That worries me a little bit. Jedrick Wills, honestly, I find him to be in the same category as Wirfs. So if the Browns got Jedrick Wills, I wouldn't be upset. But I think teams that are line needy, the Cardinals, the Jaguars, the Browns, the Buccaneers, they are going to get an answer at these offensive line positions, period. And that's true. And you go into that second, you go into that third round, there are going to be some really good players. And that is exciting for this draft if you're an offensive lineman guy. To me, defensively, the next big theme in this draft is there's a lot of top-end great talent. All right, you've got Isaiah Simmons, Jeff Okudah, Chase Young, Derek Brown, all very high-end top-end talent. Tristan Wirfs, Jedrick Wills. But as you get deeper into the later rounds, does this draft have a significant steep drop-off? To me, in more so than recent years. Just following it, besides receivers and offensive linemen, the rest of this draft is looking a little rough. I think there's a bunch of high-value running backs, but I don't think there's that definitive game breaker at running back. I think there's going to be some steals like Lynn Bowden. Later rounds, there's going to be people who are really excited to utilize him in different ways. But man, once you get outside of the first two rounds, it's going to be really hard to find those diamond in a rough prospect this year because I just don't think there's as many of them. Those to me are the biggest themes going into the draft, and I really am excited, and I don't want to ever talk down on these players, but just realistically, the amount of players who hit and miss are always going to be greater. The misses are always going to be greater than the hits. And I think the lofty expectations that are put on some of these players really takes a toll on what they actually end up doing. And there's a lot of solid pros who are drafted very high, like Jadeveon Clowney was the number one pick in the draft. He has not lived up to number one pick expectations, but he's been a really solid professional football player. And unless you're a guy who was drafted in the 5th or 6th round that ends up winning a Super Bowl and being a Super Bowl MVP, usually you sort of let down everybody if you're a first round, second round pick and you don't end up winning a Super Bowl with that team that drafted you. And that is unfortunate. It's very rare that you go on to have a career of Joe Thomas and lose all those games, but still have that individual success. So, it's uncommon. It's interesting. But it's just a question of how humans are. And humans look at these draft prospects and expect them to be the next greatest thing. And it's the same with college football recruiting. You see these 4-star and 5-star recruits, and sometimes the pressure gets to them and they don't pan out the way they are supposed to. It's all right. There's going to be another player in the future. And if And if people didn't have such limited scopes of time, it'd be really easy to accept that fact. And as a kid, every single draft pick that didn't work out, I was angry. And now I just want people to be successful, and I want the Browns to find the best way to win. And I know that's all fans really care about. And I'm excited to see the future with a lot of these players. But this next segment, I'm going to predict hits, and I'm going to predict misses. 6 of them. I've got 6 lined up right here. So first round prospects that will hit or miss. All right, hear me out. All right, the first round prospects that will hit. My first miss, Justin Herbert. I do not think Justin Herbert is going to be successful in the NFL. The comparisons are Carson Wentz or Paxton Lynch. I think that's very realistic to expect from these guys. And that's pretty much it with any quarterback. You're either going to be Peyton Manning or Ryan Leaf, a professional quarterback for a long time, or you're going to fall out of the league. I don't think Justin Herbert's going to miss as hard as Paxton Lynch, but I think he's more talented. I think he's a little bit smarter of a quarterback when it comes to reading the game. I think his system was less defined than Paxton Lynch's with Justin Fuente at Memphis. So I do think that Mr. Justin Herbert has a better chance to hit than a lot of those other smaller school guys who had big arms and, sort of did not pan out. But he's on my miss list. My first hit, Tua Tagovailoa. Yes, there's a lot of conversation surrounding the guy when it comes to injuries. His hip, his ankles, he's been hurt a lot. But at every single level, he's been successful. At every single level, he's won. And he's a guy, even though we got a 13 on the Wonderlic, who just really comprehends the game of football extremely well. And, there's probably going to be some looking into that Wonderlic test. Maybe he has ADHD or a learning disability along those lines, like dyslexia that really affects him or negatively affects him. Maybe he's just not a good test taker. That happens just as much too. What you do hear about Tua Tagovailoa, though, away from the Wonderlic, is he really does understand the game of football. He's really advanced in that actual understanding of the game of football. He is a guy who is a little undersized, a little bit smaller, but if he gets into the right situation, I think if he falls to the Chargers and avoids Miami, he is a guy who can elevate that franchise. And he is exciting. And if you can get him through that year, with the Tyrod Taylor going 8-8 or so, draft some more protection for Tua, get him into the system, get him acclimated, let his brain progress a little bit in the NFL, let him get used to the speed in practice, he will hit. And I even think he'll hit in Miami. I just think it's more likely he'll hit if he falls to the Los Angeles Chargers. Miss, Mekhi Becton. This miss is a little challenging. I think if you're going to bet on all the tackles in the NFL draft, the first one to hit is going to be Tristan Wirfs. I think he's the only automatic of the tackles. And, when you look at Mekhi Becton, he's a guy who's lost a lot of weight. He hasn't fully gotten comfortable playing in his own body, from what I've read in scouting reports, but he's a physical specimen. He dominates. But when you have athletes of that size, injury really comes in and worries you. Can he end up being a very dominant football player in the NFL? Yes, absolutely. Anyone with that frame can. But does he carry the weight well? Is he mobile enough to pass protect the way he needs to? These are questions that he'll have to answer. And if I had to predict right now, I do think he's going to be a miss, unfortunately. Next, hit, Isaiah Simmons. Yes, a very versatile player. 6'2", 230 pounds, freak athlete, can cover guys in the slot, has shifted outside in college football to cover some really talented receivers, plays linebacker, plays safety. Where he ends up in the draft all depends on what the coaches want from him. He is perfect for the modern NFL with his ability to cover pass, his physicality, and all that. I think no matter who drafts him, there's no way you can mess this guy up enough to make this a miss. My next miss, Grant Delpit, LSU. The so-called wannabe TBU. Grant Delpit was a Thorpe Award winner, but degressed each year he was in college. And I guess the actual correct word is regressed. Apologies on that. The coffee's hitting. I'm talking really fast right now. But Grant Delpit isn't a versatile defensive back. He's not a strong safety, and he's not a free safety, and he's not a corner. The teams that are taking him in the most mock drafts are the Dallas Cowboys. He does not fit what the Dallas Cowboys want to do, but he's a popular name. He's a decent athlete. I think this has bust written all over it. I think Grant Delpit is one of the more overrated players in the draft. He was one of the more overrated players in college football last year. He had that number 7. He played at LSU. He was in this long line of successful defensive backs, and he won the Thorpe Award on popularity and not actual talent and play. Grant Delpit is going to be a miss. That is one I will guarantee. And hit Tristan Wirfs, automatic. I talked about another tackle. Tristan Wirfs is going to be an automatic hit. This is the one I'd bet my house on. I think he's going to be the best tackle in this draft. And if he's not, he's going to be a solid NFL pro. So that's going to wrap this episode up. I'm excited for the draft. We're going to talk about this more next Monday. When all the players are drafted, I'm actually better at talking about the draft then than I am about projecting it and predicting it. So we'll talk about it then. I'll talk about teams that got way better, good fits, all that stuff. All the draft is projecting the future. We'll see. Hopefully there's some news on for sure if we're going to have sports in the fall. We'll see. It should be one of the first industries back. And if it's not, I'm going to be very sad. Thursday, all things Michael Jordan and all things whatever comes up in the sporting world. This is your host, Christopher Rennie, signing off. Peace out.